All right, everybody. So we're going to get started with our CLPS panel, and Josh Cahill, who's our Deputy Director of the LSIC, is going to moderate. But I wanted to take just a second right before we get started to say that there's so much exciting stuff happening in the realm of Lunar, and we know that there's a landing expected from iSpace at about 12:45, so right in the middle of a lot of our activities. We're all very excited for that. And we have someone from iSpace who's going to be able to give us a bit of an update at the end of our CLPS panel. So we'll be able to hear very quickly as what's happening. Again, I'm very excited to hear from them. And I will let Josh come on up and introduce our panelists, and we'll get started. Josh?
All right, thanks, Wes. Okay, as Wes has mentioned, we've got a lot of things going on. First, we're going to be speaking or listening to Brad Bailey, Assistant Deputy Associate Administrator for the Exploration from NASA.
Great, thank you. It's a wonderful opportunity to be here. As you may or may not be aware, I work in the Exploration Science Strategy and Integration Office within the Science Mission Directorate. It is our primary responsibility to make sure that science is well integrated throughout the entire endeavors across all the various mission directorates. So we work closely inter-directorate with all the divisions of SMD, but then make sure that that science gets translated out into our partners in ESDMD and SOMD to make sure that requirements are being drafted appropriately to satisfy the needs of the science community, as well as working with our STMD colleagues to make sure that the investments that they're making are beneficial to the science that we're trying to accomplish from the planetary decadals and the heliophysics decadals from all the different divisions of SMD. So one of the other things that we do within our office is manage the CLPS initiative, the Commercial Lunar Payload Services. I'm sure many people in here could probably give a much better talk about CLPS than I can, so I won't get into it too much, but I will endeavor to, there we go. But I wanted to start off with just a quick slide of all the various lunar missions that our office touches overall right now. And if you go through and count, up here you'll find 23 distinct and separate missions that we're working with between now and 2025. And I mean, it really is a renaissance of lunar exploration, and the science resulting from that lunar exploration is just going to be groundbreaking. And I will also mention that this doesn't include, it includes a handful of the partnered international partners that we're working, or international missions that we're working with, but it doesn't include all the international missions, and it doesn't include a lot of the CubeSats missions that we've been working on as well. So it really is, hopefully just looking at this spiral chart really does drive home the fact that we are getting back to the moon. Early and often it presents a wonderful opportunity for people across the entire community, and it really comes about, and most of it is coming about through innovation. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do with CLPS. Again, Commercial Lunar Payload Services. Just a quick refresher, I always read this first bullet and then break it down real quick, but CLPS is an innovative service-based competitive acquisition approach that enables rapid, affordable, and frequent access to the lunar surface via a growing market of American commercial providers. I could probably fund a CLPS mission just with all the 25-cent words in that one sentence, but it is a wonderful opportunity to get a multitude of payloads down to the lunar surface in a rapid, quick fashion with our commercial partners. Some people have likened it to FedEx or UPS or your favorite postal service to the moon, right? So NASA have our payloads, and we give them over to our commercial partners and say, please deliver these to the moon. We don't care how they get there. It may be on a truck, it may be on a boat, maybe they've got an airplane taking it there. However they choose to get their, our package from here to there. Similarly, the same thing is going on with our commercial providers. They may all of our commercial providers have different ways of getting things to the moon, different designs of their landers. They can provide different services, different classes of landers, different masses, different capabilities across the board. And so what we're trying to do is socialize and transmit what our needs for those science payloads are to the broad community, and allowing the innovation within the commercial sector to solve the problem of how to get there, how to accommodate those payloads, and then continue to provide new capabilities as we broaden out and really start to go after these major scientific questions and inquiries that we have that are driving us from the decadals. I will also say that right now we have 14 domestic companies that are eligible to compete for these lunar contracts. So that's 14 companies that are in the IDIQ pool. When we come out with a request for proposals, those 14 companies can come back to us with bids, and then we ultimately make a selection on who we would like to deliver those for us. Right now we have 9 awarded lunar surface deliveries that you can see there across the bottom, and there's the time frames that we're expecting to see those deliveries go. And we do have a budget to support a cadence of approximately 2 CLPS deliveries per year. And when you think about it, it's not just take this one payload. We are asking for them to take multiple payloads, suites of payloads, and those payloads are not just science focused, right? There's a lot of technology development, there's exploration-centric payloads that we're also asking them to deliver. And so when you look across what you see here within these 9 awarded lunar surface deliveries, we actually have 54 distinct different payloads that we're asking to be delivered to the lunar surface between now and the end of 2025. And so when you sit back and think about that, 54 distinct different payloads, and that, to me, that just boggles my mind that the number of opportunities that exist out there to get science done, to help buy down risk associated with Artemis and crewed missions into the future, and demonstrating these technologies on the lunar surface. It's just an amazing opportunity. It is a wonderful project that we're working through here. I will also say that one of the main things that we do, so our office through the CLPS project has 4 metrics that we try to gauge ourselves by. First is, getting the vendors to develop and get their landers to the launch pad. The second is, of course, landing on the lunar surface. The third is do great, amazing science that is high value, high priority as defined by community documents. And then the fourth is, of course, standing up a lunar economy. Ultimately, NASA does not want to be we don't want to be the prime customer for all of these deliveries. And we would consider ourselves to be successful when we start to see several of these vendors actually landing on the moon without NASA payloads. That means that there are other commercially derived or internationally derived payloads that are funding these landers, and ultimately that is a metric of success for us, is to show that the lunar surface is valuable, not just from a NASA perspective. So we do definitely encourage our CLPS vendors to go out and sell any remaining capability they may have for their landers that they can then to basically non-NASA, non-US government customers. So here's another way of representing that bottom bit, is that here we have our CLPS deliveries from 2023 through 2026. You can see that we have the first 2 deliveries are expected to go in the next couple of months. We have Astrobotic and Intuitive Machines are expected to go shortly. And then we have a 3rd delivery from Intuitive Machines to the South Polar region on the connecting ridge that is delivering our STMD payload Prime 1, which is a combination drill and mass spec. From there, we have several deliveries next year in 2024 to Reiner Gamma, a magnetic anomaly, lunar swirl. We're also planning to go to Mare Crisium with several geophysics payloads. And then we're going to start delivery of a lot of our PRISM payloads. And PRISM is Payloads and Research Investigations from the Surface of the Moon. That is a program that we stood up to fund PI-led research that really focuses on significantly addressing decadal questions. And so we do have that for CP11, I mentioned to random gamma, CP12 going to Schrodinger Basin on the far side that will also have comm relay satellite that we asked for as a service. And then we also have, we're also going to be delivering Viper, which is Volatiles Investigation Polar Exploration Rover. So that's going to be delivered via CLPS through Astrobotic as well. Let's see, I'm kind of jumping around here a little bit, but again, this chart really is trying to drive home the fact that we are getting back to the lunar surface. We are utilizing the innovation of the commercial sector in order to solve the problems that we have from a science perspective, and from a science and an exploration perspective as well. So we also, let's see, I think the only other thing I wanted to mention on here is that we did make a recent selection of Firefly to deliver what we call CS3, which is a partnership between NASA and Department of Energy to do some far-side radio cosmology observations. So we're quite excited about that and showing that it is more than just NASA. It is, we're cooperating with Department of Defense, we're cooperating with Department of Energy, and several others potentially in the pipe as well. So again, the first two sites coming up, we have TO2AB going to sinus viscositatis. AB, TO2 is our second task order. AB is Astrobotic. And they're going to sinus viscositatis, which is near the Gruithuisen domes. There's the star you see on the map. And the science we're expecting from that will complement another PRISM-selected suite of instruments that are going to the domes themselves. So we're actually going to explore the mare around the domes and then go explore the domes, which are a silicic volcanic complex. And so we're really excited to have to be able to compare and contrast between the two areas in that vicinity. And then TO2IM is going to Malapert A. Again, TO2 is, and IM stands for Intuitive Machines. And there you can see on the right-hand side where the star is, so that's where we're going to Malapert A. And we've got a suite of instruments there that are both science and exploration related. And so I want to take a quick moment and just talk through maybe a couple of the lessons learned that we've gotten through up to this point. So clearly we haven't landed anything yet, but stay tuned, just like Kudo R is about to land here in 10 minutes. I promise I'll be done in time so y'all can zoom in on our phones while listening to us, of course, up at the panel. As we're leading up to our first couple of landings, I just want to take some time and just talk through some of these lessons learned. The first one is that really, so what we had done previously for the first several, so TO2IM and AB, we went out and solicited for instruments that were pretty high TRL. They were already flight spares or very far along in the development, and we just needed some high quality science instruments that we could put onto these early landers to demonstrate the power of the CLPS model and demonstrate how it works. And so, but as we're getting bigger and more complex in our science needs, as we're trying to answer decadal level questions, we realized that those payloads haven't quite been developed as much. And so what we actually enjoy is having a longer period of time between selection of our payloads and when we go forward to the vendor community with our requests for task order proposals. And that gives us a lot more time to mature the payloads and set those interfaces, because when we do have these contracts set up with our vendors, those are firm fixed price. And so any mass growth, any changes in power needs, et cetera, that the payloads come up with as they're going through development, that ultimately comes back and costs us NASA a lot of money. And so really we need to have those interfaces set when we go forward to the vendors with those RFTPs. The next bullet down is that cost is not linear with any particular metric. If you look at the amount of mass that we are asking the vendors to put down and you compare that to the cost of how much it's costing us, the cost of the winning proposal, you kind of come up with a metric of around $1 million per kilogram. But that's not really a metric that we can use overall, because as we're really becoming, again, more grander in scope in what we're trying to accomplish, we're asking for other services. We're asking for enhanced, we're asking for mobility on the surface. We'd like a service where the vendors go out and they find the rover, they have that rover integrated into their system, and we just give them the payloads that go on that rover, rather than us giving the rover to the vendor to deliver for us. And so when you start factoring in, okay, well now we want this amount of payload, this amount of mass on a particular rover, that doesn't really scale with that kind of $1 million per kilogram, because clearly it's going to be more. We can also start thinking about other types of technologies we might need, such as surviving the lunar night and or operating during the lunar night. That's a service that we would like our vendors to be able to provide for us. And so again, that doesn't again scale with mass. It's all about the capabilities that we're requesting from our vendors, and that's so you can't actually pin down cost to any one particular metric. I would also say that cost does not go down as we continue to add new desired capabilities, right? And so some people think, oh yeah, well you've already got a couple landers in your back pocket, and all the future landers, it's going to go away. Costs are going to start decreasing, and use that money for other things. That's not the case. We're asking for these other things such as mobility. We're asking for things such as survive the night, and ultimately, we'd like to be able to ask for things such as sample return. And so when you really start adding in those new desired capabilities, the cost for each of these missions is likely to go up, particularly depending on how difficult it is to accommodate those new requests for our science needs. One of the things that we also recognize is that we've been very hands-off. We basically, just like with FedEx, for example, we just give them our package and they say, okay, thanks, and they put it on the back of the truck. When sometimes those packages are really, really valuable, and you might want to take out extra insurance, right? And so this is the case, for example, with Viper. Viper's a large rover that we definitely have a vested interest in making sure it is successful. And so one of the things that we do is we can go back to the vendors and say, hey, NASA would really like some augmented insight above and beyond, kind of our hands-off approach for design and development of your landers. And the vendors are like, sure, you can have augmented insight for a cost, and that's true for all of this, right? It's part of the commercial sector, and everything that we ask for just comes at a cost, and that's fine. But having augmented insight gives the higher ups at NASA a little bit more room to breathe, that they feel like they have an understanding of the model and how we're actually delivering some of these higher value payloads, and then when we sit down and start thinking about establishment of the lunar economy and international contributions, when CLPS first stood up, we took all comers, right? We wanted to be able to make sure and demonstrate that we had payloads that we could use on these initial landers, and so we kind of said, yeah, any comers, come on, we'll take your payloads, we'll deliver it for you. As we're progressing and kind of moving out of startup mode, it becomes clear that, okay, well, when we do that and we start partnering with some of these international partners through NASA, it actually takes away some of those potential non-NASA sourced payloads from the vendors that they could then go out and and sell some of the rest of their capabilities. And so we realize that has an impact on the lunar economy overall, and we're starting to encourage private entities as well as international partners to go direct to our vendors with their needs. That doesn't mean that there's not strategic partnerships that NASA may want to have in the future, but we do recognize that there's an impact on the lunar economy there. I know we're kind of getting close to time, so I just wanted to call out, I said decadal a lot to these days, and to me that means a lot. To some others that may not mean that much. Here is just an example of the various decadal surveys that we have up here, one of which has the planetary one that was recently released last year in May, I think, maybe April. identified Endurance A as CLPS delivered potential payload, and that is ultimately a rover that will land in South Pole Lake and Basin, roll for 2,000 kilometers, and ultimately collect samples, take measurements the whole way, and ultimately end up at the South Polar region where those samples, 100 kilograms of samples, will be brought back to Earth with a crewed mission. So it will ultimately be delivered by CLPS, though, and so right now we're working through several studies to define what those science needs really are, and then come up with an overall implementation plan for how we're going to do that. That said, I'll just stop there and be happy to take any questions during the panel session. Thank you.
Okay, CLPS panelists, please assemble. We thought we'd put some obstacles in your way. You're supposed to hurdle it. Okay, so we're first going to get going with each of them introducing themselves briefly. Ben Bussey, representing Intuitive Machines, is going to be taking the time to present 1 or 2 slides. Can we get his slides up? Mitch? Here we go. There you go, Ben.
Great, thank you. I didn't realize until this morning that I would be the only one, but I thought, hey, I made them. But I'm going to talk to them, I hope, think about it in a way that I think hopefully describes the program in general, not just what we're doing. And I'm clicker free, so if I could do next slide, please. Okay, so the purpose of showing this is the fact that many of the companies that you see up here, and even though it's not at the table, people think of us as just a lunar lander company. We're just CLPS, and the companies are more than that. We're engineering companies, and we do a range of services. So yes, in our case, we have the fixed lunar services primarily with our Nova C. But people want their payloads to move around, and so we have a strategic partnership with Lunar Outpost in Colorado for rovers. Thanks to STMD, with a tipping point, we developed a hopper that can carry 8 kilograms of payload, about 25 kilometers, so it can go places that rovers can't. And also, like others, we're able to drop satellites off in lunar orbit en route to a landing. Next slide, please. So really the purpose of this for the audience is the fact that we're all going to be going, the cadence, starting this year, the cadence is going to be fairly stunning. When we sit here next year, hopefully we will see lots of data and images that have come back from multiple vendors. So we're going, multiple times per year. You'll see people going. Brad touched upon the fact that the goal is for payloads to not just be NASA payloads, and obviously I'm showing ours here, and you can see already for the first 3, it's a good mix of both the original payloads that were part of the task order, as well as we have found interest from non-NASA for payloads. And right now, our goal is to make Brad successful, and Brad said he'd like a mission with no NASA payload. So right now, we're close to getting to being able to do what we're calling IMC-1, or IM Commercial 1, which would actually have no NASA payload at all. Last slide, please. And then finally, I think, in order to promote discussion, I think you're going to start to see very different capabilities that you can all take advantage of. One of the things that we are actively looking at is, because we have the ability to drop satellites off into a nice mapping orbit, and because we're putting up our own communication relay services, we've been thinking about what could you do, what useful new data could one acquire with a relatively modest small sat in lunar orbit. And we've been talking to, the Earth observation market, I think, is and there's some very amazing technology that's demonstrated there, and we're looking to how we can leverage that. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Next, we're going to go online. Mike Sims, do you want to give us a brief introduction to yourself?
Yes. You're going to have to open up my video. Someone locked it down. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mike.
Okay, great. Welcome. My name is Michael Sims, and I'm speaking for Ceres Robotics. Ceres is one of the CLPS providers. We're part of the 5 of what was called first on-ramp. None of those 5 those later on-ramp companies have yet won a contract for a CLPS lander, and we haven't. Ceres' primary lander that we are designing and proposing is called the B5, and the B5 is a capable and adaptable lander that's capable of landing on the order of up to a metric ton of payload. And all of our designs have been in the form of having several hundred kilograms of excess payload. And so the tricky part is that how does one sell those payloads prior to the opportunity of the flight? And so that's sort of a tricky point along the way. Ceres is our core, our beginnings were in robotic surface activities. I founded the field robotics effort at NASA Ames, the Intelligent Robotics Lab, and worked on a lot of Mars rovers. So that sort of was the growth out of which Ceres grew, and we have focused on landers, and landers really come, I think, the essence of the game of the humans becoming multiplanetary is really about cost. There's a lot of technologies you have to go through, and you have to manage those in a given way, and there's a lot that needs to be developed, but it's cost that's been the barrier. So if I think in terms of cost, let me translate that into mass. So the Ceres program, the CLPS programs that have come to date have been in the category of 100 kilograms, roughly. I think of that as a Vespa scooter class. So let me translate those into transportation systems. So what we've landed to date have been science instruments, payloads in the order that a Vespa scooter could go around with. There is the next category up, which is going to go from a few hundred kilograms to a couple of metric tons, maybe, and that's a pickup truck category. Those are on the works today. You could actually probably propose, the CLPS could propose that and get several viable options for doing that category of vehicles. Above that is a category that is really, in my mind, Apollo era, which is up to metric ton, goes from a few metric tons up into about 40 metric tons. And there's a number of programs that are working on that and have worked on that and continuing in terms of human programs. But that's the next category of payloads that we're going to take to the surface. And finally, there's the really large payloads of 100 metric tons, which SpaceX and Starship is designed to carry down. Each of those have their own uses, and there will be their own uses the same way that they're different vehicles. In the top category, think of that as a boxcar on a train. So those different categories of shipping material to the surface and doing things are a reasonable way to think of what we're sending to the surface to do activities on the moon. So far, all of CLPS has focused on the lowest of those, and I think that's because the pricing model I think it's actually more about fear of the pricing model. The pricing model looks like $1 million a kilogram. So if you go to several hundred kilograms of payload, it looks like you priced out that model. I think that's not really true. I think that from the initial proposals at the Viper level, you're looking at programs that are well under 200 million. The Draper, as Brad was indicating, Brad's not a great, Brad is a traditional NASA mission. So I think of that not as a CLPS mission. But if you get into the CLPS way of thinking about payloads and way of thinking of deliveries, then that category is probably only a third more than the 100 kilogram, third price more than 100 kilogram. So the reason I do that, Bring, is that we as a company, Ceres, have really focused on that next level and have incorrectly to date assumed that the NASA demand for payloads would regularly move up to larger payloads. And part of the reason for doing the larger payloads is that there are 3 components to the costing of what happens in one of these missions. The way I think of it is three components. One is launching. One is, and the launching part is by SpaceX and other launch companies have done a brilliant job of decreasing those costs, and they continue to do that. Besides launching, there is getting there. And that's what CLPS program is all about. It's all about how do you decrease the cost of getting there? And I think it's done a great job at that. CLPS is probably, in my estimation, half the cost of what it would have been under traditional programs. CLPS is still underpaying its weight for those missions. So I wouldn't expect that the prices you saw in the early missions is something that makes any sense to continue, because that largely stemmed from external investments without any really strong promise of return. But the next category, I believe that NASA will get into a set of payloads where it's paying a reasonable price, and that price will be sustaining the commercial companies inside of CLPS.
Hey, Mike.
And that's the category. Yeah.
Do you mind if we, you're going to get another chance to speak. Do you mind if we continue to introduce the panel?
Yeah, thanks.
All right, next, Fig, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Hello. Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Israel Figueroa, better known in the community as Fig. I'm with Firefly Aerospace. And Firefly Aerospace, like some of the other companies here, is not just a lander company. We're really an end-to-end space transportation company. With our launch vehicle family, starting with the Alpha launch vehicle that reached orbit last year. And we're also on contract with the Space Force to deliver their Victus Nox payload, where we are going to be proving the ability to launch within a 24-hour response time. So this is very exciting times where launch is supposed to happen sometime in May. We are a CLPS provider, clearly. We have two CLPS missions, one in 2024, May of 2024, and then the one that was just recently announced about a month ago for a 2026 lander to the far side of the moon. And then we also have what we call our space utility vehicle, which is where we want to go after that in-space mobility mission area. So we really are positioning ourselves to be a end-to-end space transportation company.
Great, thank you. Mike Provenzano from Astrobotic.
Testing, cool. Thanks, Josh, for having us here. Thank you for the whole LSIC team for having us here as well. It's great. So I'm Mike Provenzano. I'm representing our Lunar Surface Systems team at Astrobotic. Astrobotic, like many of the companies here, we provide lunar logistics delivery services. So we provide delivery services to the moon, also mobility services on the moon, and now more recently, power services on the moon. I'm just going to give a few updates on where we are at as a company right now. Our Peregrine lander is completed. It's ready to be delivered for its first mission down to ULA's Vulcan Centaur launch vehicle. So very excited for that mission. That's going to be happening very soon. And then we also we're actively working on our Griffin Viper mission. So that Griffin lander, we've started procuring flight hardware, and it's really great to start seeing that lander come together and begin assembly. On our rover side, we have our Moon Ranger rover, which is under the LSITP program. And that rover is also pretty much completed. It's flight qualified, getting ready for its upcoming mission. And then we have our another lunar rover called our Cube rover, which is going to be flying on our Griffin Viper mission as well in 2024. So that mission actually has some payload space aboard. There's about 1 kilogram of space on there. So if anybody wants to talk about that, I'll be around to chat more about that. And then lastly, just wanted to announce an exciting update today that we just procured our third launch vehicle. It's a SpaceX Falcon Heavy. It's going to be flying to the south pole of the moon. And it's going to be utilizing most of the capacity on the Falcon Heavy. So it's going to be a large mission, and it's going to be flying in the 2026 timeframe. So really excited about that. If anybody has any questions about that here, I'll be around and happy to share more. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Mike. And then last but not least, Alan Campbell of Draper.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks everybody for having us here. Looking forward to a great panel discussion. As Josh said, I'm Alan Campbell. I lead the CLPS program at Draper. Draper is a little bit different than a lot of our friendly competitors here within the CLPS program. We've been around for a long time. We were the first prime contractor for the Apollo program, where we developed the guidance system for the Apollo missions to deliver astronauts to the moon and back home safely. We were fortunate to be awarded the CP-12 task order last year, and as you may have seen, we recently announced we completed our first 2 payment milestones on that particular development program, and we're looking forward to a few more announcements in the near future, and are excited to talk more about our progress there.
Great, thanks. So I'd like to remind people we are taking questions on Slido. We'll try to do one in person and then one on Slido, just so you know. First, so some of the things we were talking about earlier, Brad, from NASA's perspective, are there any lessons learned that you think NASA might be applying moving forward, considering what we've learned from CLPS thus far?
Were you listening to my talk? So no, I do think that there are a number of lessons learned that we are trying to enact, I suppose is the best way of putting it, that's across the board. I mentioned several of them already, and probably the ones I'm willing to share are the ones that were already in my presentation. I would be curious to hear from the rest of the panel, though, if they feel like there were lessons learned that they've been learning over the course of their, as we've been selecting the various, going through the whole process from, how we socialize what we intend to do from a science perspective and what payloads we're going to be asking them to deliver to the RFP process, and then ultimately how we actually get to the launch pad and then down to the surface. So I'd like to pivot to the rest of the panelists and ask their opinions on what they think their lessons learned are and how we, NASA, could do better to enable them to be successful.
Ben, do you want to?
You're welcome.
I think, to be positive, I think the lessons learned is that I think CLPS has thus far worked as had been hoped, in that it is providing an option for NASA and others to access the lunar surface at a price point with a different risk posture that NASA hadn't been able to do before. And when CLPS was started, the goal was for NASA not to, it was basically, the question was, is there a market for a lunar delivery service for US companies? And I think the answer to that has been shown to be yes by us and our colleague, other companies. There are payloads out there. There are people wanting to fly which are non-NASA. So I think the lessons learned is that if you are prepared to accept a slightly different risk posture, then then CLPS has worked.
Fig, go ahead.
So. From my perspective, and I have a long history of acquisitions with the Space Force, what I have seen that Firefly have benefited, and I don't know if anybody have given NASA this feedback, is it's the way they help the contractors along, right? So it's not a confrontational, you award these task orders, and it's not a confrontational relationship with the contractors. And our engineers feel comfortable to go back to these NASA engineers and ask questions about, hey, we're having this tough problem, and they feel confident that we're not going to be punished by asking questions, and that back and forth with the NASA engineers have really helped smaller companies like Firefly thrive over the last few years, and really get to where we are today. And if it wasn't because of the CLPS contract, I don't know that Firefly is alive today, like that first award a few years ago. So I just wanted to make sure that that's the key one that I wanted to say.
Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, from Astrobotic's perspective, we think that one thing that may help improve the program is actually heading in a direction of block buys. So the idea of actually purchasing multiple missions at once, there is a challenge with actually getting the supply chain up and running, the workforce up and running in a very quick development time frame to support these missions. So by having block buys, we can actually get ahead of that, and we can work with our vendors and our supplier base to prepare for that. We can align with NASA's roadmap, and we can have those known mission locations and mission definition, the interfaces for those payloads to be prepared for those missions. And it helps our own workforce prepare as well. So And there's a chance that, with more missions, it can increase the affordability of the missions because you can buy several of the components at once from vendors and kind of have that flexibility there. So block buys have already happened for commercial crew. They've happened for national security space launch. And I think right now would be a great time to be talking about that for the CLPS program as well.
Alan.
So Mike, you just reminded me of something. One other thing that particular approach would really help with is workforce.
We're having a little trouble with your mic.
Sorry, I was going to say that one thing that having a known continuous stream of missions really helps with workforce maintenance. With all of the really exciting things that are going on in the space industry at this time, you see a lot of people jumping from company to company to go from really cool program to really cool program. And it's a lot easier to be able to maintain and build on the lessons that we have learned by retaining that staff over and over again, and ensuring a continued pipeline of really interesting programs is one good way to do that. The other thing I wanted to mention was to turn it a little bit back on Brad, and this is certainly in the positive lessons learned, is how quickly NASA has been correcting mistakes isn't the right way to put it, but correcting, as they've seen things come up and reacting to it, and helping the vendors proceed along, as Fig was saying, and helping themselves understand what they need in order for them to be successful as well. I mean, we've seen over the about 10 months that we've been on contract, a continued back and forth with our integration manager, with the CLPS program as a whole, trying to make sure there's a good happy medium between what we want and what they want to make everybody happy and make everybody successful in execution.
That's a really good point. And as I mentioned, some of our first couple of deliveries, we were in startup mode, and to be honest, I want to say we didn't know what we were doing, but we didn't know what we didn't know. And we went out with this firm fixed price task order, and everything was happy, and then all of a sudden, like, holy crap, we forgot harnessing cabling in the masses for all of our payloads. So there goes the masses up. And so, and then we're like, oh, well, actually, if you all went here instead of where you were planning on going, it would actually be more beneficial to science. And so I think we are still feeling our way forward in terms of what it is that we actually want from each of these individual deliveries. I hear Mike on the block buys that completely understood that position. But we're working on just really defining what our needs really are and getting them set and solidified as early as possible to reduce the churn that comes with these continued back and forths. Thus far, our partners, our commercial partners, have been very accommodating and willing to work with us. I think it's been a positive back and forth as we're kind of getting to that more steady state, and and it being able to turn the crank such that when we ask for what we want, that is it, and they can move forward with confidence that that's what we're asking for.
Yeah, and one additional comment. I agreed with everything everyone said. The addition, and I consider CLPS to be a great program, a brilliant conception and well executed. The one thing I would suggest is that at time of a payload award, many of the programs that have flown previously have been in a position where they have had needed additional payloads in order to fill out their manifest. And the process, it would be really great if there was a huge outflow of interest in the commercial area, and there is interest. It's not yet a fully vibrant market, and that will occur, but that's not there yet. So it's still important that the government help fill that gap and help the companies that are currently existing to continue. So what I would suggest is that because of the way you do payloads inside of NASA, that it represents a long time lead, there's a long process, that if there was a way to improve the process to be more efficient, more DARPA-like, that you could, at the time of award, then also be able to go to that vendor and say, yeah, we have an extra 40 kilograms we could fly at this price if you want to fly that. And that be, instead of an open competition, that's something you could do by like a mission of opportunity effectively, but one that's designated for the winning of those payloads.
Thanks, Mike. We have some questions coming in online. Remember, you can upvote them if you like. Let's go with Mike Provenzano. Is there a plan to share lessons learned between providers after landings? Is there any collaboration between competitors?
So we're certainly open to sharing information with NASA and the LSIC community. I think we're having those discussions now as the Access to Space page has been opened up. We don't have any collaborations currently with the other providers at the moment. But in terms of sharing information from those missions, but we're certainly open to the conversations with NASA if they'd like to share some information with the LSIC community.
Anybody else have a response to that?
First, I want to explain myself. Sorry, Mike. Aerospace and the space industry is a small industry. We're working together on the Blue Origin national team for the crewed lander, and a lot of I expect that we'll be working with all of these companies at one point or another. So just comment on the collaborations front. More generally, no, I'm personally all in favor of lessons learned across our competitive organizations as well. Especially at this phase in the program. I've said this before and I'll say it again, a rising tide lifts all boats. And if we can learn from what happens for commercial or NASA CLPS missions and apply that across, that's absolutely something we should be doing. I know it's one thing that we've been working to leverage our relationship and our partnership with iSpace Japan and the iSpace US team as well to take advantage of lessons learned from their commercial mission and taking that in order to help us with our execution of the CP12 task order, and we're looking like that's something we'll continue to do as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. We're going to start asking questions a little more freely now. Brad, is the marketplace that LSII is developing useful in the CLPS program? This was from online.
Well, absolutely, and I'm just going to speak from a science perspective, but so there's a lot going on within LSI and LSIC that is beneficial to science overall. Clearly, there's a lot of applied science that SMD-focused science needs to be able to accomplish, such as, characterizing the lunar surface, finding out where the volatiles are, what form they're in, et cetera, that ultimately feeds forward into the needs that are being developed here for ISRU and others. I would also say that there are, in order to, again, meaningfully accomplish some of these priority science investigations, we have a need for new technologies that to be created and tested and ultimately flown in order to really go after those questions. And so leveraging that innovation, leveraging those new technologies, and then CLPS providing a platform to test those new technologies, I think is a wonderful synergistic relationship between science and the space technology sector.
Great, thanks. Anybody else have a comment on that? Okay. So the CLPS program is an experiment. What other experiments in acquisition do you think we're likely to try to perform in the future? Ben. You had an odd look on your face, so I thought,
well,
that's great.
Or as I call it, a look. I think we touched upon this as an experiment. I said I would argue that it's already 90% of the way worked. I see us kind of expanding into different services, and so we've already now had, for example, the task order that included drop-off. I hope that's something that expands. I mean, Jim yesterday talked about TechRise, and that's one of the exciting program. I'd like to see something like a TechRise to lunar orbit. What can you build? Something small that take advantage of the fact we've got these landers going every year. To do interesting things like a tech rise to the moon, or even sample return. Hopefully, the capabilities and the services that we're asked to offer will improve.
So just a few things. So on the lunar side, I think that the next step of effort that we should focus to put time on building the infrastructure around the moon, right? The comm, the power, the things that you need to actually have a sustainable presence in the moon, and then eventually have humans there. So, I mean, that's probably the next step of the human in the moon. But you can use the similar system as CLIP, or similar program as CLIPS, to can apply to Mars. And as we move, vector from the moon into Mars exploration. But even further than that, I actually recommended this to the Space Force at the Space Symposium last week, that the CLIPS program is really a good example for them to go after that in-space mobility and logistic mission area that they really struggling to spark in their end. So I believe the way I see it is that the CLIPS have been a spark to establish that lunar economy and that lunar innovation. And the Space Force could have a similar construct, go after, don't tell us the how, but give us the what you need done, have an IDIQ type contract, and award a couple of companies missions to start moving the ball forward in that complicated mission area. So.
One other comment, if I might.
Sure.
And that is, you heard a lot from Pam and Spuzz earlier talking about Moon to Mars objectives, and you also heard about the architecture definition document, the ACR process, and how ultimately, we're attempting to architect from the right, but some of the things, as Pam said, you're not going to change Orion at this point. And at some point, we have to. We want to get here, and we're here. How do we get from here to there? And I think there's a wealth of opportunities for the commercial sector to fill in those gaps for, up mass from the lunar surface, return mass, power surfaces on the surface. And so it's not just the robotic aspect. I think there's actually opportunities for CLIPS and the commercial sector to be involved across the entire Artemis endeavor.
Thanks. You actually took the question out of my mouth. So we're kind of keeping people from lunch, so we'll ask one more question and kind of wrap it up. Actually, the question I wanted to ask went away. So it was, what can we do with the LSII fledgling marketplace that might encourage a better data buy market?
So I think to add to many of the comments that were just shared here and to address your question, Josh, I think there's power services. I think that there are sample return services. I think that night survival services are all interesting things that we should be looking at as a community. And LSII could help promote that by putting, LSIC has already done a great job sharing links to the companies that provide those services. I think there are many more companies that are providing those additional services that we're talking about. So it could help facilitate those conversations, could help engage with the companies that are developing those services right now, so we can share more about what the business model is. We can develop that business model together and begin those conversations. And I also would add to that, international agency participation is another thing that I think we could collaborate on further. I think that encouraging the international space agencies to work directly with the CLPS providers is something that would be really good for the community. Those international space agencies could focus on very specific activities that they want to complete. We're doing this now with the Mexican Space Agency. We're doing it with the German Space Agency. And I think that that's a really good opportunity to bring in more international partners, is connect the providers with the international agencies.
Great. Any last follow-ups?
Yeah, I just want to echo and reemphasize what Mike just said, and actually even broaden it out a little bit more. I think one of the great things about this particular community and the resources that you've been developing, Josh, is the potential for its use as a driving agent in all directions. So let's NASA know what is out there from a science perspective, what the scientists are interested in, what the technologies are out there and the technologists are interested in working on developing, and the capabilities from lander providers or other in-space services, whether it's power, whether it's mobility, whether it's in-space servicing, all in all a capability marketplace that can really help leverage the community to come together.
Great, thank you very much. So that kind of concludes the CLPS session. Are we gonna Yes, so we have a representative from iSpace, Marshall Hall. He's going to give us a little update on what's going on.
Hey everybody, I can assure you we did not plan this to land during LSIC, but it's been quite remarkable to be in this room with all of you with all the excitement during our landing. So my name is Marshall Hawley. I'm Government Relations Lead here for iSpace US. So I have a quick statement given the landing. So iSpace Inc., a global lunar exploration company, announced today that the Hakuto-R Mission 1 lunar lander was expected to land on the surface of the moon at 1:40 a.m. Japanese Standard Time. At this time, Hakuto-R Mission Control in Nihonbashi, Tokyo, has not been able to confirm the success of the lander, but we are still investigating. I also wish to relay a short message from our CEO and founder, Takeshi Hakamada, that we will keep going. We will never quit the lunar quest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That concludes our CLPS session. However, we have Reeve here. He's going to orient us for what's happening next.
All right. We have 2 funtivities planned for lunch, all of which are designed to break down the stovepipes and foster community feedback and discussion. There's some sheets for discussion on your table. About 20 minutes into lunch, we'll encourage people to meet a stranger and use these as discussion beginners. And then at about 2 o'clock, we'll gently, then firmly, encourage people to go to the breakout room so you can give us feedback on the community white paper. With that, it's time for lunch. On your mark, get set, go.